The topic of the message today is who is the most important person in your life? And I don't know if this is something you guys think about much, but I got to thinking about it, and especially with the father's passing, thought I should reflect on that a little bit, and I wanted to share with you some of my reflections. You know, you could argue that your parents are the most important person in your life. I mean, they gave you life, right? If they weren't alive, you wouldn't be alive. And they went to the trouble to raise you and give you life. So they've definitely got to be high on the list. I'll give them that much. Of course, in the Orient, you know, when the parents are so important, the oldest son will, after the father passes away, will set up a tent outside the burial ground and stay there for 3 years. This is the old Korean tradition. I don't think they do it nowadays, but you just think about that. Living in a tent for 3 years, mourning your father's passing, that's probably the definition of filial piety right there. Someone can actually do that. In the West, we're probably not that far advanced. And I also was sort of thinking about that too. You know, why are we not as connected to our parents? I don't know, maybe we're too analytical. You know, we think, well, you know, they did this, they did that. I'm still thinking about why in the West we are that way. Maybe it's our individualism. Maybe it's our every man for himself kind of thinking. Something I think we need to think about. Something we as a culture need to improve. So I've talked generally about parents, but Greg, what about your parents? What about your mother? That is not an easy topic for me. She had some emotional problems, and this actually led to quite a contentiousness between her and my dad. So she actually got quite emotional and threw things and made a lot of accusations, and he just really couldn't take it anymore. So they got a divorce, and that happened when I was about 11 years old. And I told this to my spiritual father when I first joined the church, because the rest of the story is they met during World War II, and he was stationed in Kentucky for a very short time. And then they corresponded for a few years after they met, and then they got married after World War II. Then I came along a few years later. So my spiritual father said, well, Greg, it's obvious, you know, they got together for one thing, to produce you, so you could join the church. So Jack is Jack Hart. That's a very interesting, because I went through a lot of turmoil in those 20-something years before I met the church. But that was his conclusion. Of course, you know, we can speak about one's spouse and one's children in terms of the most important person in your life. But I just don't want to look at it on an emotional level. I want to look at it from an existential viewpoint. You know, what path are we on in life? In my case, I was on the path to self-centered, downward spiral until I met our movement. Then I went on more of a God-centered, upward trajectory. So we have to think, you know, who had that life-changing impact on one's life? Who had that life-changing impact on my life? And I think this applies. I was grateful for Triton's testimony, that it can happen not just to us older people, but it can happen to us younger people. When God intervenes in your life, then you know, things can happen, things can change. So, who's the most important person in my life? The person who gave me meaning, the person who gave my life purpose, the person who answered some of life's basic questions. For me, it's our two parents. They've given me an example of how to live my life, how to serve our community, how to love my wife and children, and answer my basic questions of life. That's pretty heavy stuff, as you can tell. So, who's the most important person? So let's look at some of, just a moment, some of the things I've learned and received from true parents. This is a picture of the first 100-day training program at the Belvedere in the early 70s. And I'm in there somewhere. You may recognize some of the other people. They're all a lot older, I can tell you that. At that first 100-day training center, Father would come down almost every day and speak. And that was quite an experience because he would tell the joke, when he first visited Japan, I remember this talk, people expected him not to use the stairs, but to fly up the stairs. Or they were shocked that he had to use the bathroom. So these are some of the personal stories he told us. It was quite a precious time. Well, I went there as a trainee, and as things happened, I became an assistant team leader. We didn't call them families back then. We should have. And then I became a team leader. I became an assistant workshop coordinator. I was there a long time, so it's not like they sent people out. People got called back. Finally, I think they made a mistake. They made me workshop coordinator, but those things happen. So one night, I heard someone came and said, Father wants to meet with the workshop coordinator at breakfast tomorrow morning. I said, gee, I wonder what the workshop coordinator is going to say to Father. I said, oh, I'm the workshop coordinator. Oh my God. The great and terrible day of the Lord. Anyway, I went to the breakfast. We had a nice breakfast. I don't remember exactly what we had, but it was nice. And so older Korean leaders were there. And at the end, they said, well, Father said, how's it going? Are there any problems? Well, I said, it's going pretty well. There is just one little thing, Father, that people have mentioned in passing. Nothing really major, but we have these lectures in the morning. We have more lectures in the afternoon. And we even have lectures at night. And they just, a few people said, just a few people. I didn't say it like that, but I'm dramatizing it for you guys. If we could just practice lecture a little bit in one of those sessions, it'd make us better prepared to go out into the field. And Father thought for a moment, and he said, well, I think it's good to hear the lectures over and over and over again. Then they can really sink in. Then you'll know them, you'll understand them. I said, okay, you're the boss. It's just the workshop coordinator who's really come here by mistake. If that's the way you want to do it, that's the way we'll do it. But interestingly enough, about 1 or 2 weeks later, we started practice lecturing. And I'm not saying it was because of me or anything, but that's one of the things. Be willing to alter if there's a better way. That's one of the things I learned from Father through that experience. The next one, could we go back to that other one? I don't know how clearly you can see this, but the first 100-day training was all men. But after about a month or two, they started adding women. So I just wanted to make that mention that he's willing to alter things. Another example. Okay, number 2, doing your best is not always enough when it comes to the providence. Well, that's at the Baltimore Day of Hope tour when I was the state leader of Virginia. At the end of the training, they needed a state leader in Virginia, and for some reason they picked me. So Father stood me up at the leaders' meeting and said, he didn't say it this way, but this is the way you're going to be the state leader of Virginia. No, he didn't say it that way. He said, okay, Breland, you're the state leader of Virginia, I understand. I said, yes, sir, I am, ready to go. Finished the training. I'm primed. I'm ready to go. I just have one question for you. Are you willing to die for Virginia? So I paused. I said, trying to be pragmatic, but not being very diplomatic. I said, well, Father, you know, I'll do my best. Wrong answer. Are you willing to die for Virginia? You know, he was serious. Said, yes, Father. I got it. I'm willing to die for Virginia. And it really sent home to me, you know, how really determined and serious he really was. He really is. Okay. There's a right way and a wrong way to do things. Later, a few years later, I became the director of the science conference. And this is a small thing, but to me, it was a really important point. At the end of at the end of all major conferences, the program and the books that had been prepared for the conference